Many years ago, a small group of friends ventured out for a weekend kayaking trip on one of northern Michigan's popular recreational rivers, and they enjoyed the experience so much that the kayaking weekends became a yearly tradition. As you may have guessed, I happen to be one of the persons in that group of friends. Over the years, there have been times when a new person or two has accompanied us, and other times when, for one reason or another, people were not able to join us. However, the core group has remained pretty much the same. When it comes to recreational activities involving water, the state of Michigan has seemingly endless possibilities. In addition to having 4 of the 5 Great Lakes touching its nearly 3,300 miles of mainland and island coastlines, the state is also home to over 51,000 miles of river, 650 miles of which are considered scenic or wild. With so many options, where do we find ourselves returning to time after time? The Sable and Rifle Rivers in northern lower Michigan. And the base camp for our trips, the Rifle River Recreation Area. The recreation area is perfect for several reasons. It's only a 2.5-hour drive from where we all live. It provides easy access to multiple put-in and take-out locations so we can change up our route from year to year. We're able to rent a cabin inside the recreation area, and the cabin is located right on one of the park's several small lakes, which are perfect for a quick paddle and fishing. So, what do our kayaking weekends look like? Well, obviously there's kayaking. But there's also fishing, plenty of food, campfires, lots of camaraderie and laughs, awesome scenery, and times when my buddy Ken and I have instructed our group on the finer points of night photography. Our kayaking weekends usually take place between late September and late October, but there have been a couple of years when our trips took place during the first week of May. And since we typically hit the cooler months of the year, we have encountered a wide range of weather. A few times we have encountered unseasonably warm weather, allowing us to float down the river in shorts and short-sleeved shirts. Other trips have been overcast and cool with periods of light to moderate rain, and sometimes they have even been downright cold, requiring us to wear layers of warm clothes as we paddle leisurely down the river in the midst of falling snow. But our trip late in September of 2020 threw us a curveball. The trip began much the same as it always does. Ken and I drove together to meet our friend Carrie at his home, and we arrived just as the sun was beginning to rise. We transferred gear and supplies to Carrie's truck, secured our kayaks to the trailer, and headed north. But only after they ensured that I was in possession of what has become my yearly price of admission, pudding chocolate chip cookies. Conversation and laughter, coupled with a backdrop of sunshine, farmers' fields, and colorful trees, ensured that our time on the road passed quickly. And before we knew it, we had arrived at the Rifle River Recreation Area. As we drove slowly down the winding dirt access road to our cabin, we felt a sense of calm and relaxation wash over us. Our drive to the cabin was a slow one for 2 reasons. First, we didn't want the trailer bouncing around behind us on the narrow, uneven dirt road. And second, because, well, we were now on up north time, and that meant that there was no reason to be in any kind of a hurry. With time on our side and tranquility all around us, we made several stops along the way to take in the scenery. We even stopped for 10 or 15 minutes to stretch our legs and breathe in some fresh air as we continued our conversation on a scenic bridge overlooking the Rifle River. When we arrived at the cabin, we felt a sense of welcoming. It was like meeting up with a good friend that we hadn't seen in, well, about a year. cabin at Grebe Lake sleeps 6, has a table and several chairs, propane heater, fire pit, outdoor grill, a picnic table, and direct access to the lake behind the cabin. We unloaded all of our gear, set up our camp chairs, and sat down to enjoy the peaceful surroundings as we talked and awaited the other 2 members of our group who would be arriving later in the day due to prior commitments. An hour or so later, we ventured out onto the lake for a change of scenery and some fishing. After all, a beautiful lake is a terrible thing to waste. The temperature was pleasant, the sky partly sunny, the lake was encircled by trees in various stages of color change, and we enjoyed watching a bald eagle as it made graceful passes over the lake. We had a good time on the water, and even happened to catch several pike between the 3 of us. Their fight on the opposite end of the line is always an adrenaline rush. When Derek and Ron finally arrived, we tasked Ron, our resident firebug and campfire expert, with starting a fire. Sometime later, we used a portable stove to heat the sloppy joes Ken brought for dinner. That was followed by a tasty meal with more conversation and laughs.
If you're right, it's not profound.
After dinner, we rounded out the day with an evening paddle around the quiet, glass-like lake, followed by a bonfire that lasted well into the night. The curveball on this trip was thrown at us during the overnight hours and continued into the early morning. Rain. The weather radar on our phones showed that most of the state was receiving moderate to heavy rain, and the forecast for our area indicated it would persist for most of the day. Our morning conversation quickly centered on the forecast and logistics. In the midst of heavy rain, we would need to leave a vehicle at the takeout location, then pile everyone into the other vehicle and drive to our starting location. The next and most time-consuming tasks would be to remove multiple ratchet straps that secured the kayaks to the trailer, carry the kayaks down to the river, and then finally to gear up. Yeah, we would probably be soaked before the first paddle even hit the water. We would then have 2.5 to 3.5 hours on the river before we could get out and repeat all of those tasks in reverse. The consensus? None of us were thrilled with the idea of being soaked and cold and then sitting in our kayaks for several hours. So we voted, and it was unanimous. Skip kayaking altogether. Initially that seemed a bit strange, but then again, our tradition existed for the sole purpose of being able to get away for a few days, to visit with our friends, and enjoy nature, and that could be accomplished without kayaking. Fortunately, we had a couple of pop-up canopies to shelter us from the rain, camp chairs for seating, and plenty of food to hold us over until dinner. We spent the entire day under the canopies, laughing, snacking, and talking about various things going on in the world and in our lives, reminiscing about common work experiences, and recalling highlights of previous kayaking trips. We even got to listen to Carrie and Derek discuss the finer points of knife smithing and the multitude of knives they each own.
By 9 p.m. tomorrow.
There were a couple of times throughout the day when the rain slowed to a mere drizzle. We used those opportunities to stretch our legs, get out from under the canopies, and warm ourselves next to the fire that we had managed to keep burning despite the rain. There was even a long enough break later in the afternoon for us to sneak in 2 games of cornhole. However, before we could finish the second game, you guessed it, the rain returned, and we were forced to finish the game with dripping wet, mud-covered bags and hands coated in mud. After washing up from our muddy cornhole tournament, we headed out for dinner at one of our favorite area restaurants, the Faull Inn. The drive out of the park from our cabin took longer to navigate than it did to reach the restaurant after we hit the main road, but all that did was ramp up the anticipation for their awesome pizzas and the bantering that was sure to follow with the quick-witted waitstaff. When we arrived back at the cabin, the rain had finally stopped. Ron brought the fire roaring back to life, and we rounded out our last night together around the fire, enjoying its warmth, the crackling and popping of the wood, and the pleasant, unmistakable aroma of the cool, smoke-infused night air. We woke to perfect weather on our last day. The air was filled with a cool, crisp freshness that is typical of an early fall morning in northern Michigan. As an added visual bonus, the entire lake was shrouded by a layer of fog that imparted an otherworldly feeling, and the entire scene was backlit by a large orange sphere glowing brightly just above the horizon. As the rest of us were slowly coming to life with mugs of hot beverages, Ron once again started a small fire with some embers he found buried beneath a thick insulating layer of ash from last night's fire. Before we knew it, it was time to leave the cabin so it could be cleaned and made ready for the next occupants. And wouldn't you know it, not long before we left, the sun finally won its battle with the fog. It shined down on us from a bright blue sky and caused the changing leaves to pop with a vibrancy we hadn't seen since we arrived. Even though we had to leave after the weather took a turn for the better, it didn't take away anything from the camaraderie and our weekend in the great outdoors. The last thing we did before parting ways was to gather for a quick group photo. Another awesome weekend had come to an end, but we had new stories to reminisce about when we return next year to continue our tradition.